Hello, good evening, and welcome to UPfront. My guest tonight is the author of the book, if you have not seen a copy, Aluta Continua, In Search of a Better Tomorrow. This book is a reflective analytical work. The book presents critical perspectives on governance, education, African history, socio-economic challenges within both the global and African context. Nsako emphasizes key lessons in leadership and coaching, critiques state policy, and offers reflections on the responsibilities of African intellectuals and professionals. He weaves together a historical event in very different perspectives, also from personal insights that he saw, he's been through, and known over the period, and contemporary African concerns, examining how societies can progress towards a brighter future. The author delves into cultural, political, and social paradigms. You forget he's an engineer by training from the very basis anyway. Of course, he connects development, capitalism, connecting these to African themes and historical perspectives too. He also argues that Africa must adapt, grow, and learn from past mistakes to avoid future economic and political missteps. This is the crux of our conversation, but it's premised on this book, Aluta Continua, In Search of a Better Tomorrow. Mr. Nsako, you're welcome very specially.
Thank you very much, Raymond, and thank you very much for that very generous description of the book and of myself. Thank you.
Now, sometimes people, mindful of your prominent corporate life, forget and think there is no activism in you. Until they read content like this, then they are worried about whether the man indeed is just a corporate nice man or a very active person in our society that's almost revolutionary in his thoughts. What was the inspiration behind this? Very different chapters with very different thoughts, sometimes poking the bear at very different ends that, if I did say, the Bar Association, for example, was minded of you as a member, they'll be hauling you before a disciplinary committee today.
Well, I should not be hauled before any disciplinary committee by anybody for just stating my point of view in a democracy if I haven't broken any law or defamed anyone. So, and I haven't done so. That's not the accusation you are leveling. But let me say that I have participated in the general discourse of our country and of the continent in several ways. And I tend to sometimes put my views out because I process life a lot by writing. So on social media spaces particularly, but sometimes also to deliver speeches, etc., I put a few things together. And it is worth saying that there are two people specifically, my wife and Nana Damwa Are of Diakpabli Publishers, who kept on saying that my thoughts should be leveraged more coherently and consistently in a book and so on. Initially, I was quite dismissive of it all because I thought, well, something happens, I respond to it. But the industry of Nana Damwa and the persistence, I'm talking over years. This is not a conversation that happened over weeks. I think he first started to speak to me about this maybe 10 years ago or so. But his persistence in industry meant that eventually we pulled together certain things. Even I did not expect that they would come together in a book the way, but obviously between him and his partner, Kofi Akpabli, they are very good at this sort of stuff, so they pulled it together. So that's where it comes from. It's just a citizen's reflections. That's it, really.
You start with a tribute to lawyer Koto Ampao. The admiration in that tribute is quite clear, but there is something I picked up about some subtle dissatisfaction with a certain group that you suggest appears to have betrayed or strayed from a certain course. Now, I know that throughout the book, you reference the things you learned from him. You say things that some of us did not even know he could do, like dance, for example, because he looked too rigid to do some of those things. But the the man you portrayed to many people was so principled to a fault, was ever principled that throughout ages he appeared not to have compromised on those principles ever. Except that in talking about him, you bring in others who are betraying the cause, who preferred other things rather than staying the course and doing what's required of them. Exactly what cause were you referencing anyway?
No, first, Akutuampao Sheshe, as many of us called him, and many other people knew him much, much better than I did. But he was a man of many parts. So yes, he came across as a very serious guy and a very deep intellectual, all of which are descriptions that he more than deserved. But there was a fun side of Sheshe. He was a great dancer, for example. Many people know that side of him as well. And also, he was a great sportsman. That side of him seems to have been submitted. In fact, the name Sheshe is from his football days. He was an athlete, very, very, not some sort of occasional indulgence, but he ran for the University of Ghana, and he was a sportsman across many sports kinds. So Sheshe had, he practiced yoga, for example, so he had many sides to him. And therefore, it amuses me that you're tickled by that Akoto was a dancer. Those who know him well would laugh when they hear that. Oh, he was a great dancer. And a great guy overall. And I think the way that you describe him is the right way. I had a great admiration for the consistency, for the degree of principle that he showed. Of course, no man is perfect. Some people expected him to be and to carry all the issues of the world. No man is perfect. None of us. There's not one healthy brother, James Baldwin said. None of us is perfect or infallible. But to a large extent, I think that he deserves to be acknowledged and celebrated for the contributions that he made for the pursuit of freedom, of liberty, of justice, of dignity for his compatriots, even though he had more, to some extent, opportunity and access to power. If he wanted it for its own sake, he could have abused power more than most people. So I want to start by celebrating that. And a huge part of his activism was, of course, directed to ending military rule in Ghana, de jure and de facto. We have to remember that. And that's when I got to know him. I'd come out of university. He was senior to me in many ways, in terms of his exposure to this sort of struggle, but also in years. He was my senior. I think I was in primary school when he was playing football in Legon, etc., etc. And he worked in several communities. So the lawyer in you is always looking for the subtext. So you picked up that, yes, I do have, of the group, it's not everybody that I can say stuck to the things that they articulated in the early days, that the way that Akoto Ampao did. And just to give you a few examples, we were in those days fighting very hard for the demilitarization of politics, as I say, de facto and de jure, because de jure we kind of got to a point where we still believe that the influence of the arbitrariness and capriciousness of coup regimes had not fully gone away, even though we had pulled together some sort of a constitutional environment. It still took a huge amount of struggle. Now, if you look at the things that people were talking about at the time, we looked forward, and I don't think I speak for myself alone. There are many people of my generation and before who expected that the democratic dividend was not just going to be development, but a cleaner politics, less corruption, and so on and so forth. We didn't expect, definitely, this degree of dysfunctional partisan polarization to emerge. And Akoto, till the very end, spoke out against these sorts of things. But when I look at some of his colleagues, I mean, there are certain things that make me almost emotional when I think about them. Right from the beginning, a constitutional framework spells out, right from the beginning, the directive principles of state policy. So it's not me saying it. You look at what we expected. that democracy will deliver, and we're nowhere near that. Yes, I am happy that some of the elements of oppression and militarization that existed in the past no longer exist. But we're nowhere near what the directive principles of state policy spoke about. 7 January 1993, it's now 31 years there, and we can't say that we're anywhere near. Of course, that's very disappointing. But more disappointing is that the people who were very concerned about these things and were campaigning for dignity and so on and so forth, many of them have become establishment creatures and forgotten about the things that they were talking about. I mean, I've never stopped talking about, for example, in 1995, the Alliance for Change, which Aluta was a very prominent member to many people. He kind of functioned like the General Secretary. Organized the Kumipreko demonstration, a historic demonstration, in my view, in my lifetime. I haven't experienced that kind of mobilization since, and before I hadn't seen anything like that. Unfortunately, the elements of the Gestapo at the time gunned down Ahunhonga, who was 14, Jerry Ope, who was 25, Kwabna Asante, who was 22, and Richard Aminga, who was 43. Today, when I mentioned the names of Ahunhonga, somehow people, I think because he was the youngest at 14, people kind of remember. But when you mention Richard Aminga or Kwabna Asante, people don't even know who you are talking about. And yet the leader of the Kumipreko demonstration has become the president of Ghana. Before that, he was the attorney general. And that they have just been forgotten. Unless, of course, something has been done quietly that I'm not aware of. I am not clear in my mind were their families compensated in any way. The sacrifice, these people were not even active participants in the demonstration. Ahunhonga was a bystander, 14-year-old. He was cut down. Many of the leaders, I shouldn't just say that was Akufo-Addo because the Alliance for Change didn't really, he was a spokesperson, but it focused, it operated as a community of leaders, not just one leader. Many of them have become prominent in the de facto partisan. When you say that they have joined parties, they say no, but the de facto partisan structure, they have a huge amount of influence. So why has nothing been done for these people? And then we get told, people ask, when you call demonstrations, why don't people turn up? Well, if you forget people who lose their lives in patriotic duty, in the line of struggle for a society, then that's what happened. People learn their lessons. I'll just give one example. Who could have thought that after 31 years of democracy, the big issue for discussion in Ghana today will be the destruction of nature, of our forests, of our vegetative cover, what we are calling galamsey. And that the people who stood up before guns in those days and defied the power structure and raised these issues would have fallen silent. It is those things that you perhaps picked up that I consider quite disappointing, that a lot of the people who at the time styled themselves as being interested in revolutionary change have become bourgeois establishment people. And to that extent, they have betrayed what people stood for. But I suppose it's part of human nature.
Use a big word to describe another group of people. The grouping that within the middle and upper class today, the lawyers, the industrialists or so, you asked them in chapter 36 to wake up. You were quite emphatic on that they should wake up. You have just described how some have lost their activism and leading to what's currently happening. Wake up to do exactly what? We are not under military rule anyway.
Yeah, we are not under military rule, but we will all be. And to some extent, we were perhaps, if I speak for myself and others who think like me, perhaps we placed too much on that the issues in the society were all deriving from the existence of a military dictator, when I look back now. Because we did have huge expectations. Today I can see that what we essentially moved into was not revolutionary democracy. The way that I've come to know it, it was what I call bourgeois democracy, or what I describe as a Santa Claus democracy. It's a step forward, but it's just a very small step forward. It's nowhere near what you need in a society to get transformative impacts. Now, right from the beginning, I'm not the one who is saying it for the first time. Esteemed and distinguished social scientists like Claude, etc., have made the point. Our post-colonial state, if you want to call it that way, has essentially catered for a very small minority of people. The elite have captured the state. And the direct consequence of that is a huge amount of inequity in our society, huge amount of inequality. So if you belong to the elite and you are not directly connected to the misery of the masses, you become a lumpen bourgeoisie. That's how I described it. Now, it is very easy to get immunized by your immediate short-range comforts and to start to think that all is fine because, after all, you're living quite a good life. But the course of history tells us that if you leave a hugely unequal society, the majority of your compatriots, you have left them in misery. Eventually, the circumstances that can arise in society, the convulsions, the explosions, they get to you. There is no way that you can. And I will paraphrase a few sayings that I like a lot. James Baldwin said, the most dangerous creation of any society is the man with nothing to lose. What we are creating in Ghana, you see all the undertones in galamsey, etc. We have too many people who have nothing to lose. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, only the guy who is not rowing can rock the boat. When you have high numbers of the unemployed, you have many people who are not rowing. They can tear down a society. Your high walls, your wild beasts as dogs and so on and so forth will not be able to protect you. And those who were alive saw what happened in the country in 1979. I call it decentralized violence. The victims were not necessarily guilty. It's just anger that exploded in the society. My good friend, Mzamo Masito, Dr. Mzamo Masito, a South African, once introduced me to a saying that I will try to paraphrase, and then I leave it at that. It says, the poor cannot sleep because they are hungry. Okay. And the rich cannot sleep because the poor are awake. The poor cannot sleep because they are hungry, and the rich cannot sleep because the poor are awake. That really is where we are in the course of history. You go through history and look, and you can see that what I'm talking about is not invented. On all continents of the earth, these sorts of things have manifested. So all I have been trying to say to the group that I described as the lumpen is that if you are well off, you are educated, your compatriots are sacrificed, and through their sacrifices, backbreaking exertion, they have got you into where you are, and you're no longer interested in having an organic, functional society in which everybody has a stake, one day it catches up with you. So you better be concerned.
Has it caught up with us in, say, the current galamsey menace? Is it a symptom of the problem you have just described?
For sure. No doubt about it. The people who are involved in it, yes, they are big operators who are involved in galamsey, and I get a little bit irritated when I see young boys in pits who are dirty, covered with mud, and then we are celebrating that we've arrested galamsey. It cannot be those people who are mobilizing excavators, and what is pseudo-industrial activity cannot be them. But you have to ask yourself that what gets into a people that they are now willing to destroy their own land. They are aware. There are no public safety protocols. These people are sometimes putting their bodies into chemicals in order to be able to reach out for this gold illegally. They can see the water from which they drank, water that has served their ancestors. We are the people, I said in a recent write-up, we are the people who referred to the water bodies as Totrobonsu. If you look in Akan cosmology, we almost worship water. What has happened that suddenly people are saying to themselves that in order to survive today, if we must destroy the future, we will do it. there's a certain degree of hopelessness that breeds that, a sense that they have been forgotten by the people who are sitting in the center and doing well. That's what drives that. And so, yes, it has absolutely caught up with us. That is an example.
Now, maybe we move from this because I was going to ask you, how do we fix the problem? It appears entrenched. Government is probably using the same methodologies they've used over a period, and they talk to the people, carrot, and the stake theories are being propounded consistently. But from your perspective, what will be the panacea to this endemic destruction of our water bodies and our forests today?
First is that we usually forget that democracy, as Amartya Kumar Sen, the Nobel laureate, likes to say, is about public reason. There is no expectation that if you're the president, you sit down and by yourself, you have all the ideas and common sense in the world. It does not work that way. So on big issues of society, what democracy should not do is to yield the kind of factionalism that we have now in our society, where all that these guys think about is, does this serve the NDC's interest or does it serve the NPP's interest? And they rotate positions on the basis of who is in power and who is in opposition. You cannot run a country like that. You need consensus and multi-stakeholder approaches to run a country. For anybody to sit in Accra, in Jubilee House or so, and say that they're going to solve galamsey by sending the army and the police, they're joking. Because the people today, one guy who is a PhD in mining engineering said that he believes that 10% of the population earns their economic sustenance from galamsey. If you just go there and you yank it, how are those people going to survive? You have to be able to answer that question. So what you need in times like this is multi-stakeholder consultation, right from the grassroots. It's not for one person to sit down and say, oh, I have an idea. And when you want to have multi-stakeholder consultation, you cannot have a situation where you say it's only NPP people or it's only NDC people who are going to do it. You need people who have the expertise, who are selected on a meritocratic basis. Sociologists, psychologists, economists, mining experts, and so on and so forth. They get around the table and you deal with the fallouts that will emerge. There are law and order dimensions of this matter. There are sociological dimensions. There are economic dimensions of it. We have allowed the disintegration in severe ways of the capacity of the state. And we are talking about rehabilitating it. We have to do it by exactly what I've said. And the only person that can convene that, I make this point all the time, the only person that can convene that is the president.
Okay.
So he has to lead and bring these people together. That we are at this stage is a significant indictment of failed leadership, that we have allowed it to get to this extent. We need to get the chiefs, everybody involved. Why have we sat down to this extent? Where now we have the people who supply us water saying we are threatened. Are we also going to start importing water? What is the function of the state, if not to guarantee the safety and the welfare of the citizens? So you ask me, my view is get those who have the knowledge and understanding of the problem together. Work with them to get solutions. Don't think that you are going to sit somewhere with army chiefs and so on and you just send people into the bush. There are examples around us. Go to the private sector. They will tell you wherever they have gone and you have found that you have just yanked out the galamsey activity, business activity also drops. Because these people, some of them have cut down their cocoa farms, which used to sustain them. They have moved away from the agriculture that they used to do, and they've gone headlong into this. You take it away, tomorrow they have no food to eat. How are you going to sort that out? And that lack of consultation, that lack of seriousness, yes, you and I know that we understand some of the reasons because we know that the money that comes from galamsey is not taxed, it's not traceable, and some of it ends at sensitive doorsteps. We cannot be hypocritical about this. Some of it ends at sensitive doorsteps. Some of these people are politically very influential. So the approach that has been taken for a long time is what somebody described as hands off, eyes off, ears off, everything off, hoping that the problem will take care of itself, and it hasn't. And now we are heading towards an explosion.
The way you describe it is scary. It's almost as if I see the solution that government is proffering. You're basically saying that we are tinkering with the problem, and I know you have a section on tokenism, but we are tinkering with the problem and not necessarily dealing with the permanent solutions that would arise at the end of the day. And you called on the president to lead this charge in a more effective way. Now, I know throughout this particular book, you talk about the kind of politics that we are doing in this country. You deal with it from different perspectives. But if you hear politicians, all that they say is there's an election a couple of months down the line, and that any attempt to pretend to look for a permanent solution now would have electoral consequences. In fact, they shroud it by saying, oh, there will be some financial problems and all the other things that they have said in times past. Do you ever see a solution anytime soon? Is it on the horizon?
There ought to be a solution. I believe that we are not the children of a lesser God, and that we have a legitimate right to aspire for a much better situation and living conditions for the mass of our people. And for that reason, we have to find a solution. Where we are is not the right thing, and you described it correctly. When I talk about the Santa Claus democracy, yes, the Santa Claus democracy yields tinkering, because the Santa Claus democracy is near term, 4 years, and then everybody, as soon as they win, they're looking for more money for the next election. What I mean by Santa Claus democracy, you know what Santa Claus is. Christmas time, he comes and gives gifts, and those who go and line up also expect the gifts. And so there's a transactional relationship of gifting. That's what our democracy has become. What do they need all those huge amounts of money for? Because they essentially go and they don't want to use the words, but it's bribing people and buying votes and giving them rice and what have you. And the people also say to themselves, for 4 years, we will not see you again. So we take what we can get. And the vote itself, because they have now over 30 years said, well, whoever comes, it seems to be the same thing. So nobody really now cares about the outcome. So what are you going to give me today? And this is not just at national level. Now there are open discussions about corruption within the political parties themselves. When they themselves forget about their opponent, when they themselves are having their congresses, they are worried about the over-monetization. Where do you go with this? In our lifetimes, the most significant economic turnaround has happened in China. People are always asking me, why are you always talking about China? I say, well, where else? Have you seen that number of people? Now you look at the methods that were used over there. They were hugely consultative. They had a discipline in their politics that we certainly do not have. Or if you don't want to use China because that's 1.4 billion people, let's look at a smaller country, Singapore. They organize national elections with $2.5 million sometimes. We even know what to do with $2.5 million. So these are the real issues. You touch on them. The changes are not going to come easily. I used to have people who say to me, but the things that you talk about, they can never be done. I say, well, if we just want to keep doing what we are doing every day, we will continue to have the outcomes that and it's even, at that time, I thought we will not move forward. Now it is worsening. As I was saying to somebody this morning, in 1978, I was in primary school. We organized the African Cup of Nations. I still have memories of this. Golden Boy, Abdul Razak was the goalkeeper Tuga from Algeria. I still remember Shegun Odegbami, Okala, and so on. I still remember these things. In 2024, we now cannot have one football pitch that CAF approves for us to use for a park. That is a summary. And because football is so seminal to the people of Ghana, people understand when you talk about it. That's a summary of how far back we have gone. So if we are going to change, when you talk about the Chinese story, it was a revolution and then significant reforms. We are going to have to do things that are structural and transformative and think long term. It's not this tinkering that we talk about. You use the word that I absolutely like, because that's what we are forever doing, tinkering. Can we bring inflation down 10 basis points? The structural discussions, our dependence on cocoa, how can we shift it to something else? The absolute chaos. I've been talking about this for a long time, and in the book you see it a lot. The absolute chaos that is our land management regime. We have now in 2024, I saw my senior in school, the principal of GIS, on an interview describing what you said scary. That's absolutely the word. It is frightening. That if Ghana International School, a school of that repute and prestige, can have people, usurpers, encroaching on their land at 2 a.m., where are we headed? To what extent then can we even say that we are a wholesome state? If you have these are the characteristics of the latifundia. When you go back to feudal barony, old problems of other societies, we are now beginning to face it. Look at where GIS is positioned. It ought to be one of the sanest parts of our society. Yeah. And yet at 2 a.m., you have people coming with earth-moving equipment. So what I'm saying is that the nature of our politics, which encourages this short-termism, I absolutely agree with the description that you gave. Because if you're elected today, you're thinking about re-election tomorrow. And then the question that I then start to ask myself is, Raymond gave me $10 million for my campaign. He says that he wants the finance minister position. In 4 years' time, I need to raise another 10 million. If I don't give him this position, will he give me the 10 million? So right down the chain, meritocracy collapses. When meritocracy collapses, you cannot enforce law and order. So I have a sequence that I usually describe. I say the state becomes incompetent because you started off with a Santa Claus democracy. What a Santa Claus democracy yields is, in my view, an incompetent state. Just take the public sector. Let the politician who can tell me that the appointments to boards, the chairs of boards and so on have always been done on merit since the Fourth Republic began, let them tell me that the very best, the most capable in our country are the people who are given these roles. No, we all know that's not the situation. So you start off with a Santa Claus democracy, and then it yields an incompetent state. And an incompetent state, by definition, is the one that cannot implement its own good laws. So when people are excited about the Constitution, I understand some of why, but if you change the Constitution today, will it enforce itself? It will not. So when you now have Santa Claus democracy, it leads to an incompetent state, it degenerates into anomic conditions. Values collapse. People do what they want in the society. Have there been arrests that have been made about the people who went around 2 a.m. going on people's lands? I'm sure you are better positioned to tell me. Every day I seem to hear about another story. Somebody's house has been broken into. Somebody has lost their land. All these disputes, yes, we're sitting with them. To deal with those matters are difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but those who have made it, the Singapores, the Chinas, Southeast Asia, which is moving forward and so on, who said that it was easy? Who said development is easy? It takes creativity and hard work and a committed people who are willing to make difficult decisions in order to secure the long-term health of society. We must accept that some of these things, they may not yield the benefits in our lifetime. The Chinese Revolution, the Communist Party was formed in 1921. They came into power in 1949, 28 years of struggle. I could go on and on, but I think you see the point that I made. When we have the conversation, we joke around with it. There's another election. So, yeah, we will vote this person out. Then what? We have done that. since 1993 or 92 was the election. We have done that. What has it yielded? One person comes, the other person goes. What has it yielded? I give you the example, Achimota Forest.
Yeah.
What is the position of John Dramani Mahama? What is the position of Bawumia? Why are they not speaking about these things? Even on galamsey. How much have they advocated on these things? They're dodging the issues and joking around with us. I'm a mate. 24-hour economy. And then people get excited. No, Napo has made another gaffe. This is about the life of our children and grandchildren. It's not a game of cards. And we turned it into a joke.
Do people in this republic, beyond your very good self and the select few in this country, acknowledge, understand, and appreciate that these are questions, if not answers, will be going around in circles, and that these are existential threats to our development as a country? Do you think that this consciousness is widespread in the Republic of Ghana?
I think that they do understand. To say they do not understand means that the person who is hungry does not understand hunger. Or that the person that is living without basic sanitation, 18% of our population, open defecation in 2024. And we say that we are a civilization. What is then the definition? So they understand they may not all use the same language. They may not all articulate it at the same level of aggregation at a macro level. And that is understandable. Nowhere in the world does that happen. But the question that we must then ask ourselves is, where is leadership? When you go into societies where there's a huge degree of consciousness, you can understand the interventions. I recently read a book about the educational process that the Chinese Communist Party uses, for example, the academies that they have set up, the party schools, etc. The role of the Chinese academy is not fully understood. Before Deng Xiaoping announced his reforms, he was in conclave with the highest ranked professors, the academics in China. He was with them for 5 days. He sat and listened to them and listened to their ideas. One of his biggest priorities was to restore the place of knowledge and learning, the professoriate and the primary school teachers, all the way down to that. Because it was such a priority for him, he decided for a period of time to handle the education ministry himself. Are we concerned about this? You go to Singapore, it's the same. It's the same. I used to have an office in Singapore. And so you have an active involvement of the state because it recognizes that its responsibility is to the whole of the society, not to a small elite. They spend a huge amount of time and energy on making sure that the issues that matter to the entire society are debated by the entire society. I visited a place in China once, a small group of 400 people. It was a very rural area. Small group of 400 people. They're debating the issues of the decisions that Xi Jinping was going to take in Beijing. And they were very confident that their views will get to him. Now, you say to me that we have political parties. I ask, how do you educate your cadres? What is the criteria of screening? How are you monitoring their continuous development? It doesn't exist. Who are the people who are rising to the top? I hate to say this, but look, when these parties first emerged, look at the caliber of people who were leading them. On both sides. I remember, Professor P.A. Chumesi, Justice D.F. Annan, Professor Kofi Awono, on the MPP side, J.H. Mensah, Edugwahi, B.J. Darocha, Kwame Donkofodjo. Kwame Donkofodjo was regional chairman of Ashanti. You know who is there now?
Yes.
So this degree of decline, you cannot blame it on the masses. The leadership has failed. And then you say, what has happened in our educational system? I don't know whether they've restored it. At some point, what I learned for history was already significantly weighed down by colonial prejudices and needed to be decolonized some more. Then for some reason, we suddenly said, now we'll not even study history. If you don't study history, how do you know where you have come from and where you are going? So when we talk about structural issues, this is what we are talking about. And that degree of willingness to open up to feedback, that we move away from that. Somebody says something and you know, I was laughing when you said I'll be drugged by the Sanhedrin. To do what? To have lunch with them or to have a drink with them? Why? I have a point of view. Well, you're drugging me for what? You understand? But that degree of intimidation has soaked into us, has seeped into our society and soaked it. So many people with great views will say, you know, if you go and talk, there's a problem. I'm sure that you guys, because I heard somebody say the other time that even Joy, they are on a regime change project. Regime change. How does the regime change project benefit Joy? In what way? So dropping that degree of defensiveness, the factionalism that is killing our country. Everything is MPP, NDC, to an extent that the last time I heard one of the presidential candidates saying that his party must also now have its judges. I said, is the judiciary now MPP judges and NDC judges? And what is the definition of that? You cannot run a country like that. You simply cannot run a country like that. Yes, we want to have political parties, have them. But political parties have now become a seminal element of identity that even surpasses ethnic groupings and so on and so forth. All that we think about is that. So if the best person in the country to do a certain role, let us say that chairman of the board of Bank of Ghana.
Yeah.
The first thing the politicians look for is, but what is his politics? You cannot run a country like that.
And even on that basis, it's not necessarily based on ideological lineage. It's not the ideas that the person has actually formed and developed over the years. It's one of those affiliating principles like, oh, he's a member of our party. Whether or not he understands what ought to be done and his ideals are good for that institution, we do not necessarily care. So even at the party affiliation level, it's more to do with the sociological elements rather than the rational choice theories over the years.
Well, I have to agree with you. Unfortunately, I wish that I could contradict you, but I have to agree with you. The Santa Claus democracy is a derivative of a whole neoliberal thing, and it just to have one ideology, which is grab, 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 and grab in the short term, and one day the future will take care of itself. That's what you see. You talk about galamsey. We are now about to lose the Achimota forest. What else? Waterways that we put. We ourselves say that we should reserve it. They are all being sold. We block, and then people come and say the problem is the citizens. It is not leadership. There's something wrong with the Ghanaian. When you come now, they are all jumping around that we should elect them. Do they think that they are going to run mass? It's the Ghanaian people. So if you offer yourself, then you have to be able to put interventions in place so that we have the right conversations and we make the right choices. So you use the word, what I'm saying is scary. It is not my intention to create alarm or panic, but the reality before us, that's the other thing. I mean, I speak to many Ghanaians that say, have you looked at this report? Have you looked at the facts that are being put before us, even by the Ghana Statistical Service? They are very worrying. You have a country in which 20% of the population lives in kiosk and containers.
Yeah.
This by itself tells you that you have a crisis. 18% open defecation. There are reports that are sitting around that say 64% of the population is in significant financial distress. By some definitions of poverty, consumer goods companies have put their reports out. You're talking about 70% plus who are described as low income. So when you talk about such a society suddenly behaving as if it is an industrial developed society, how is that going to happen? Only this morning, I was having a chat with some people about football, and they were talking a lot about the changes that need to be made. And I said that the problem with our development discourse is that it is not intersectoral. So everybody sits in their own corner and says, we need to make judicial reforms. We need to get more parks. We need to get educational reform. We need to do, but all of those things have to come together and somebody has to provide the funds. So if you don't think about what is the development paradigm that you're going to operationalize to make it happen, and then make sure that you can fund it. That was really the great unlock of the Chinese reforms. They first sorted out what they were going to do across the society, and then you start to tackle the sectors. You don't move forward. And we are not having that conversation. If I ask you, and I'm not expecting you to answer because I'm the one being interviewed, if I ask you today, what is the driving socioeconomic philosophy of the people of Ghana? You can't tell me.
Certainly I cannot. I search for those answers on the daily myself with no cogent responses from those who are supposed to develop it and share with the rest of us anyway. I get that point 100%. Maybe if I transition to now, when I was in law school in England, the understanding was that the law is for development of the state. Basically, when you deliver a justice delivery system that works, it has rippling effect on the other sectors of the economy and the entire societal fabric. So people believe in the system, there's rule of law maintained. You say that our justice administration system ought to be revamped. Exactly in what ways do you think that would be necessary?
Well, first is that we have to also have a much more open, less intimidating environment for accessing justice, for the legal process. And how many times you lived in London as a student? So how many times did you hear somebody having a conversation and then there was a big concern about you're going to be dragged before the Sanhedrin and so on? You know, this feudalistic, antagonistic, adversarial approach to everything that is a criticism. It's not common only to the bar. You see it in many other professional groupings as well. An elite that becomes all-powerful and uses the power that it has got, the bourgeois power that it has accumulated for itself to intimidate many people. The same thing that I said about galamsey. The law, the judicial process, the entire system for the delivery of administrative justice in this country is subordinate to the society's will and aspirations. It is relevant because it serves society. So it has to take members of society, like you, like me, like everybody else. It has to take them as key stakeholders and be willing to listen. Any system that does not make provision for wide-ranging feedback, any organic system will collapse. Even the way our bodies function, they function on the basis of feedback. So if you now become this intimidatory element that everybody is afraid to say anything, because you speak here as contempt. You say this, you are going to drag you before the Sanhedrin. Well, that's the starting point of your difficulties. Then you have to say, at what level is your society at? Where credibly are you going to be able to move it at? I often remind people like yourselves and myself, not taking myself out of it, that we are not the average people in the society. The average Ghanaian, the average African for that matter, is a peasant. Now, if you put a peasant in our system today, I talk about the system for the delivery of administrative justice, they are completely mesmerized. The language is alienating. People are dressed up in ways, we say, my lord this, my lord that. They are already intimidated. So how can we keep the great objectives of the legal system, but make sure that it lands in a way that people are able to deal with? Why are they able to go to the chief's palace and sort out issues over there, but when they see these robes and so on and so forth, they get so panicky? It's not just because of the attire. I have often considered that discussion frivolous. People must wear what they want to wear. That's up to them. I'm not interested in that discussion. But we need to tear down some of the walls. If you and I are afraid to speak out, then you know what is going to happen. And then there are the other silly features. When I say your boys day here, everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
But it is not just because the police are bad people. You must also ask yourself, how much are they paid? And the Chief Justice recently wrote a letter. I don't know whether it was intended to be public or it was just leaked, like everything, the whole country, the state is leaking like a sieve. And she was talking about the difficulties that they are facing, delays in the process, and so on and so forth. The use of technology, this suffocating tendency to almost worship and venerate what I call gerontocracy within the legal system. This person came 40 years ago, so their case must be called. On what basis are we doing that? One of the things that the Chief Justice touched on, he says, oh, the workload, and you know the average age of the
judges
of the senior court. And I've been thinking about it. Let us even say that the person leaves school at 25. That's being conservative. You passed out, you're a lawyer at 25. Why should we not ask the question, why after 20 years are we not producing Supreme Court judges? And why don't we have more people who are 45? It is these sorts of questions that lead to structural changes in society. I have no problem with older people playing a role. But I also do not accept that before you become a Supreme Court judge, you must be 60. Why? People have been to the moon and back at younger ages. Why must that? You need some experience. The Constitution spells out the number of years. You're the lawyer, I think it's 15 years. Yeah. So technically, if I leave the law school and in 15 years I excel, I must be able to make it. But maybe the appointment process makes it impossible. So can we have a conversation about that? I think, for example, that it should be significantly depoliticized. And we can go on and on and on.
In fact, the book has more than 5 parts. I think we have just touched on a few things within the book, and anybody mindful of this content will be easily impressed by it and will be willing to grab one. I want us to conclude on this basis. What key principles do you hope readers, especially young Africans, will take away from this book, this revolutionary book, even if you choose not to call it that?
Well, first is, as our president put it, that we all ought to be citizens, not spectators. The world needs us all, not just our country or our continent. The world needs us all. I hope that that comes through very clearly. We all have a role to play, and we must play that role. As others have put it, we all must help in holding up the sky. Everybody has a role to play in that. I would also like to say that the place of learning and knowledge, a scientific approach to things, diminishing the role of superstition. And superstition is not only among the illiterate, even amongst I consider a huge amount of neoliberalism to be superstition. People just come and say things and then we jump onto it. Private sector is the engine of growth. You don't examine what you're doing and you go around messing around your state, etc. That's also superstition. So the society becoming a respecter of science, of knowledge, of facts, we really invest in trying to discover the truth, absolutely essential. And then the whole place of united people. There will always be political parties, groupings, old boys, whatever. But this degree of factionalism that we have allowed into our society, no society has ever, throughout human history, no society has ever achieved prosperity in that way.
Yaun Sarko is the author of that book, Aluta Continua, and we just spent a couple of minutes exploring a few of the topics in this particular book. I'm sure if you have had a copy of this, you'll be exceedingly impressed by the conversation. But yeah, I'm very grateful for making time to engage us on this particular book. And hopefully, subsequently, we'll be exploring the other sections, especially the continental and the global issues you raise in this particular book. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Raymond, and all the best.
Folks, that's where we end today's edition of UPfront.